too short. We're going to hide our menu first and then read the question. Children are only allowed on a fairground ride if they are at least 1.2 meters tall. 4 children queue for the ride and their heights are measured. Our task is to complete the function provided that takes as input the heights of 4 children in the queue. Your function should output how many of the 4 children are allowed to go on the ride. Just like the last question, the program must work with other inputs or it will be marked incorrect. So the input they give here is just one example, and they test with other inputs to make sure that the program works correctly. So what our program should do is check these 4 inputs. If they are at least 1.2 meters tall, they're allowed. And what we need to do is count how many are allowed to go on the fairground ride. 1.41 is more than 1.2. 1.2 is exactly 1.2, and they said at least. So this should be allowed. 1.19 is actually less than 1.2 meters, so this will not be allowed. And 1.21 is more than 1.2 meters. So actually, we have 3 children who will be allowed on the fairground ride. So the output should be 3. Now, once again, they have provided a function or the skeleton for a function, and then we're going to fill the content in. And they have added an execute block which runs the function with these 4 inputs: child 1, child 2, child 3, and child 4. So what we need to do is check how many of these are allowed to go on the ride. Well, at the start of the program, we're going to need to keep track of this in the variable number of passengers. At the start of the program, before we check the numbers, we're going to say that so far we have 0 passengers. And then, as we check each one, we decide whether we increase this number or keep it the same. Now I'm going to show you 2 ways to approach this problem. One is the conceptually simpler method. The second involves the use of lists, and it's just a neater program to write. Let's start with the first. I set the number of passengers to 0. Then I need to check them one by one to see whether they are allowed on the ride or not. So if they are at least 1.2 meters, I increase this count by 1. Again, when I say if they are more, I'm going to need to do this, right? Because I need the if. So if, let's start with child 1. So I'm going to go to variables, find child 1. Is at least 1.2. So I'm going to need greater than or equal to sign. Remember, this is in the logic. It's in here, and you can change this symbol to greater than or equal to. It's important that we choose greater than or equal to, not greater than, because they said at least 1.2, so 1.2 is actually allowed. So if child 1 is greater than or equal to, numbers are in maths, 1.2, then we're going to need to increase the number of passengers. And you can do this by going to variables, Just like we have a set variable to something, we have change variable by something. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to change number of passengers by 1. This means increase it by 1. So if the first one is allowed, increase the number of passengers from 0 to 1. And what I can do is I can just copy this for the second child, and then copy it for the third child. And as I said, we are actually allowed to move these blocks, but we are not allowed to alter them. So I've just moved it down to make some space because we still need to check the fourth child to check if they are at least 1.2 meters. Then we change the number of passengers by 1. And then in the end, we return the number of passengers. And if you run that, it does work. It gives us an output of 3. 3 of them are allowed to go on the ride, and that gives us a correct answer. Now, what we could have done is instead of doing the same thing 4 times, we could have created a list. So let's create a variable called a child list. And we're going to set that to include all 4 children. So let's do that. I have child 1, child 2, child 3, but I still need that space for child 4. Remember, I can press on this blue button, add another item to be included in the list, and add child 4 to the list. So what I've done is set the number of passengers to 0, then I've created a list with these 4 children included, and now I can do something similar to what we did before. For each element I in the list, child list, so I'm looping through the list going 1 by 1. And I can do this. If I, because remember this takes all the different values in the list 1 by 1. If I is greater than or equal to 1.2, change the number of passengers by 1. So instead of having to do this if 4 times, you write it once and you let the loop execute it 4 times, once for each I in the child list, for each of these child 1, child 2, child 3, and child 4. If we run that, we also get 3, which is the correct answer.